On today's show, the continued inactive Collin Sexton market. We'll talk about that and more. I want to thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
The music you heard on the way in is from our friends at Astro Radio. Check them out on Apple Music or Spotify. I'm Chris Manning, covering the Cavs and the NBA at large for places like Diamond Up Rocks and Expeditions for the Sword. My co-host is Evan Damero, covering the Cavs and the Cleveland sports scene at large for Facebook's Right Down Euclid. Producer Jake Stevens is not with us today behind the virtual glass, but he is producing this episode and all episodes here on the pod. Now, Evan, let's dive into the latest on Collin Sexton, because there is not really anything new. Some chatter, some stuff coming from Chris Fedor podcast, chrisfedor.com, talking about the Mavericks and the Cavs having discussions about Collin Sexton. Also, some talking there about the Jazz and the Cavs having discussions about Collin Sexton. We'll talk about the Jazz in segment 2. Segment 3, we're just going to guess about how this is going to end now that we're getting close to September. But let's start with the Mavericks, Evan, because this one from like a Collin Sexton fit. If we're going to say, okay, what are the teams that I think could make sense for Collin Sexton and like what he does, where he could thrive, Dallas makes a lot of sense to me. What it seems like, though, is that there's not really any legs to this. And I don't really know how to construct a deal that like would make the Cavs happy to kind of acquiesce Sexton saying, okay, I want to go to Dallas now.
Yeah, so it is tricky. This would be a sign and trade scenario, I think, as Chris Fedor laid out, and I kind of extrapolated on this on Twitter.com Saturday, where if the Mavs and the Cavs were to agree on terms on a sign and trade between just Dallas and Cleveland, and it's Collin Sexton is the main piece, the Cavs can only send out Sexton because they sign him to a new contract and then trade him immediately to Dallas. And the way it works is Sexton's new contract, in theory, would only be worth 50%, or it'd be 50% of that value for this year on Dallas's salary cap, just to help you do numbers. So let's say it's $25 million. I think Dorian Finney-Smith is making $12.5 million. And then you can go a little lower for Reggie Bullock, or maybe Tim Hardaway Jr. if you want to go a little higher as well. Like, those are kind of the players that I feel like Cleveland would realistically get for Collin Sexton, maybe a draft pick or something as well for their troubles too. But as Chris Fedor noted, as you noted at the top of this segment, like, there's just not much there for the Cavs to kind of feel inclined to do a deal with Dallas. It's like there's no pressure on them. They don't really have a gun to their head right now. Like, they're not facing the uncertainty of unrestricted free agency that they may face next offseason. They really control all the cards in this situation, and they can really let the negotiations go down to the wire between them and Sexton. But yeah, in terms of fit, Dallas makes a lot of sense. I just think any team that has like a bigger point guard, like you look at Oklahoma City, that makes sense with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. If you look at Indiana, it makes sense with Tyrese Halliburton. If you look at Dallas, it makes sense with Luka Doncic, and even just all the other players that they've just assembled in Dallas. Like, it'll be a good fit for the Mavericks, I'd say, for sure. It's just I don't know if there's anything worth Cleveland's while, as you said, to make a trade work, because again, if Dorian Finney-Smith would be a pretty good return for Cleveland, I think, but I don't think the Mavs are going to be so willing to part with him. So if it's like Tim Hardaway Jr. or like Reggie Bullock or something like that, unless you're getting like a handsome package of picks, which the Mavericks don't really have after the Porzingis trade, there's not much here for Cleveland.
Yeah, in the parameters of our discussion to zero, like, really in on Dallas. Finney-Smith would make a ton of sense, but like, he's also someone that Dallas just on a new extension, I think, clearly fits very well with Luka. Sexton would like help you, but is it worth like sacrificing your most versatile spot up shooting three-point shooter? Like, probably not. I also, like, you look at the Tim Hardaway Jr. thing. Tim Hardaway Jr. is a good player, right? But he's got 3 years left on his contract. It's $19 million. He is, I'm pulling up his age right now. He is not, it's not like he's like
too much money.
Well, he's not like washed by any means. He's like a year older than me. He's 30 years old. His next birthday will be 31 in March. But he's making 3 years left on his contract. You're committing the $19 million starting this year for him when you don't know how he fits. You're kind of tied to that money. And like, yes, I think it could. I think like his skill set would make some sense for the Cavs, but like it then kind of continues to juggle up your thing. Yeah, and it is declining. So like it's 19 this year, 17.8 the year after, 16.1 the year after that. So there's like something to that being not as necessarily egregious in terms of how it's going to affect your cap sheet, but like the Cavs are at that point where they have to kind of at least a little bit decide how do we want to spend our dollars, because Darius Garland's extension is going to kick in a year. That's when Darius Garland's extension kicks in, is years from now. Collin Sexton could have a new deal here. You have potential things for Isaac Okoro and Evan Mobley and like all these other things coming down the pipeline. The Mobley one obviously being a likely max contract. So like you're already planning for how you're going to spend your money. And like the Hardaway thing, you'd have to be very sure of it. I also just can't even decide in these situations like who has to like really sweeten the deal. Because like it's the Sexton thing. He's coming off this injury. But he's the younger player. He's the most he's been I think a really intriguing scorer in a way like maybe none of these guys have. Maybe Hardaway Jr. has had moments of that. But like who's asking for picks? Like I looked at like a fake trade like I was looking to see if there were any like fake Collin Sexton trades on the Fanspo boards just for fun. And like one of the people in there like put on 2 firsts from Dallas to going back to Cleveland. And if the Cavs like I honestly like you told me that
yes to that.
If the Cavs were going to get Tim Hardaway Jr. and Josh Green in a 2025 first and a 27 first and a 2027 second for Sexton and Windler, I bet you the Cavs are taking that because like it's 2 firsts, it's replenishes your war. Just but like Dallas, there's no way I can see a world where Dallas is like, yes, we will do 2 first round picks for this. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I think you're right, just because the way the Sexton market has evolved, we see there are no interested suitors. I think that's just how restricted free agency works as well. That's the nature of the beast. But the Cavs also, like you said, the Cavs don't really need to sweeten the pot because they don't have to move Sexton if they don't want to. They can have him come to terms either on a new contract or a qualifying offer, and then they make some type of roster move in order to make space for his guaranteed contract for the upcoming season and possibly beyond. But if you're Cleveland, again, you don't have to feel incentivized or like rushed or pressed to move Collin. Like let's say you just know at this point like the relationship is just completely unfixable. Like you can't bring him back into the building and just kind of mend fences with him maybe, because there could be some hurt feelings just with how like 2 years in a row now there's just no extension being like handed to him right away. So there's that, of course, but Cleveland doesn't need to sweeten the pot. And also from Dallas' side of things, like you said, like I think 2 first-round picks in a second, like that's insane, especially because that's a lot for a guy who's coming off a torn meniscus. And yes, he was averaging really, really good numbers when he was fully healthy and was playing like a defined set role within Cleveland's offensive hierarchy versus last year where a very small sample size, we're not able to take full stock of what he would look like in this new offensive system for the Cavs. But irregardless, Dallas also doesn't need to sweeten the pot because this is a guy who, again, no team really on the market that has cap space right now at San Antonio and Indiana wants to sign. The Cavs aren't like tripping over themselves to sign him either to an extension. Dallas is just like, why would we offer the farm for a guy that no team's really clamoring for right now? And they try and buy as low as possible on him, which is just smart negotiation strategy and tactics. And in regards to Fedor's report, I think Dallas has just been a team that's linked to Sexton for a while now. And not a report, his podcast, but like I think that's just kind of been the common notion this entire summer since Dallas came up. Is just like there's not much the Mavericks can really offer Cleveland that's worth their while. And it's nice to maybe have that team in your back pocket. The next team we talk about, I feel like, is in the same boat in Utah. But like, let's say just the Sexton stuff just goes sideways, or like Utah goes through a full rebuild and moves Don to New York for 7 first-round picks, as it was reported in the New York Post. Maybe that's where the Cavs can approach things if like they just know Sexton isn't coming back. But again, there's just no pressure on their side to like really move him. And I think if you're Cleveland, you're trying to find a way to come with terms with him first before trying to move him to another team.
I think we'll get into this more in the Jazz section, but I think one of the things if you read between the tea leaves here, if you read the tea leaves, you read between the lines, it's the right phrasing there. I think that what is seemingly available to the Cavs is like kind of slightly older role players is what you could get in return for Collin Sexton in a sign and trade right now. I think what we're kind of learning is that maybe that's not what the Cavs feel like they would want back for him. And like maybe there's costs, maybe there's money aside to that, but I think the Cavs seem to be saying like, look, if we're gonna, even though we are trying to not pay him the money that like maybe he's ultimately worth, or like what like for whatever, and that's what teams do. we are saying it doesn't seem like we necessarily want like very good role players who would help us in the short term. We're still kind of playing a long term again, which I understand. All right, after the break though, let's talk about the Utah Jazz, because the Jazz are kind of, to me, sort of interesting in the context of, okay, if we're going to throw a team out there that could make some sense, that could need a guy like this, what do they have to offer the Cavs? And there's stuff there that I think is interesting, but I also understand not loving it. So we'll talk about that. But first, going to tell everyone about our friends, our old/new friends at Rocket Money. If you keep on saying you need to make a budget but never do it, if you somehow keep missing credit card payments, if you're afraid to look at your bank statements, then it's time to take back control of your financial life. Meet Rocket Money, formerly Truebill, our favorite financial app. Sick of managing your finances with the buggy spreadsheets, or have an inbox overflowing with bills, or if you're simply afraid of your checking bank statement, then it's time to take back control of your financial life with Rocket Money, formerly Truebill, our favorite app. So why did Truebill change its name to Rocket Money? Well, we'll tell you what we heard. Truebill, now backed by Rocket Companies, has grown from a bill management app into a full personal finance empowerment tool that helps over 3.4 million people with their budgeting, lowering bills, canceling subscriptions, and more, saving each of their members an average of $700 a year. And with all that growth comes the next evolution in Truebill's story, a new name. Bottom line, Rocket Money is everything we've always loved about Truebill with a fresh look and feel. Start canceling your unused subscriptions and save money at rocketmoney.com/lockedinNBA. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedinNBA. Or download the app from the Apple Store or Google Play Store. That's Rocket Money, formerly Truebill. All right, back here in Locked On Cavs. So, Evan, to me, the Jazz interest makes sense as well on paper. They're in a situation of flux. They could use a ball handler if things kind of shake out the way there. But again, it's hard to kind of suss out like what we determine as value here for these two sides. What would make it worth it for the Cavs if Sexton is coming off of an injury and wants a new contract? And if the Cavs, look, they have Bojan Bogdanovic, Bojan with a B, or J, excuse me. J.
He's got a nice J, too.
Yes. Or Malik Beasley. You could see those pieces. I was thinking about Boban. I recently watched the John Wick movie where Boban gets smashed in the face with a book, and I've been thinking about Boban lately. Regardless, they have Malik Beasley as well. These are interesting role player pieces, a little bit older. Malik Beasley will be due a contract soon. But you're not going to get more than a couple years out of Bogdanovic at where he's at right now. So, like, I also, like, and, like, I don't really think the Cavs seemingly would want to have the Jordan Clarkson experience again, right? So, this leaves us looking at this and saying, like, I don't really know, like, what the sign and trade, like bit here would be for the Cavs to do this with Utah. And it doesn't seem like the interest has, like, the discussions have gone very far anyway. But it also just feels like I don't really know, like, what makes sense for either of these teams in a world where you have to match salaries and do trades and things.
So Jake Fisher wrote about this, so I can aggregate him on this one for once. Initially, the Jazz, at least according to him, were exploring the idea of pairing Donovan Mitchell and Collin Sexton together, which doesn't make a ton of sense, but hey, rock on if you think that works.
I mean, if you had Rudy Gobert, sure, but you don't have Rudy Gobert anymore.
No, so the Jazz, like you said, are in flux. I think they will end up I feel comfortable in saying Donovan Mitchell will be a Knick at some point before the season starts, and it's going to be a lot of fanfare and grandiose stuff. And then if the Jazz kind of get what they're looking for, maybe they do reapproach acquiring Collin Sexton, because it's a younger guy who is going to be on an extension that you come to terms with. I had a reader reach out a while back asking about trading Malik Beasley in a sign and trade for Sexton, just because that's when Sexton was first linked to Utah, when Fisher first reported it. And again, this is a similar scenario, so the Cavs would have to sign Sexton to, let's say, like a 4-year or 3-year, $22 million flat annually deal. They could take back Beasley pretty easily in that negotiation. Then that still somewhat keeps them underneath the financial wiggle room of the luxury tax threshold as well. Maybe if you want Bogdanovic instead, if you want to get like a bigger wing who, like you said, has more of a limited shelf life. I had to look up Beasley's age. I believe he's 25, so he somewhat fits into Cleveland's timeline a little bit more than what Bogdanovic does, but I think Bogdanovic gives you more of a premium of what you're looking for, especially just in terms of how big this Cavs team likes to play. I think if you wanted to send Collin to a team that's possibly looking to like rebuild and just kind of flesh things out, especially if they get a boatload of picks from the Knicks, I think that's a good spot for him, because I think he can just kind of thrive there. There's a lot of more questions just about how that roster is constructed in general, but not my circus, not my monkeys at that point once he ends up being a Utah Jazz. But it's just tough because it's that conversation, like you said in the first segment, where Cleveland's not going to get a star level return, or they're not going to get a role player and multiple draft picks for Collin Sexton. They're probably going to get what the league views Collin Sexton as right now, which is a higher quality role player, but a role player nonetheless, where he's going to be making pretty good money. Like let's say he does get in that ballpark of the 20s like he's looking for. It's been reported across the board at this point. Like, that's good for him. That's, I think, a fair payday, especially when the TV money kicks in down the line as well. But at the same time, like, teams already have their reservations about him just league wide, and I think the notion that he's like some superstar level player that can only demand like multiple picks and like star level players back, like that's foolhardy in this approach. And I think no matter what team you approach, if there is a hypothetical Collin Sexton sign and trade, like, you're gonna probably be getting role players back, maybe a second rounder for as well for your troubles too. But like, again, no team needs to really be motivated to sweeten the pot, and the Cavs don't need to be throwing picks just to dump Collin Sexton, because that's terrible asset management. And also like that just isn't the case either. Like, I don't think you need to be dumping Collin Sexton right now.
I would be blown. I think there's a 0% chance that if they were to do a sign and trade, it is a dump. I think it is something where the Cavs feel like they can, even if either it is clear or that they can spin it as we are getting value back. I think that, and like playing I think it seems like they would want to play out the future a little bit more. It does not seem like a team that is fully all in on this moment, which I think is correct. Like, I think that's a very correct move. And a lot of the things, again, I think available to them from some of these teams would seem to be more win now. And this isn't like a bad contract dumping situation. Like, I think like it doesn't really help them if Sexton pulls that last lever and takes the qualifying. But like, I also don't understand.
It gets murkier if he takes the QO. Like, he then dictates what team he's traded to if he's traded.
Yes. Let's put a pin in that because I want to hit on that in segment 3. But I want to end on this. Yeah. If you were saying, okay, if you had to say which one of these teams, Dallas or Utah, were to do a sign and trade for Cavs, that's where this ends up. Is there one of those two teams what they could offer you that you prefer? If you could get like like, let's just say it's like, I think Tim Hardaway Jr. would be the more realistic one from Dallas, and then like pick whatever Jazz players you would kind of want to do there, because I think we kind of know less about the framework of those.
So I think you laying out Tim Hardaway Jr. softens my stance on trading with Dallas a little bit. Like, if Dorian Finney-Smith was available, I think Cleveland would have to strongly consider that, because he ideally, like you said, is a spot-up three-point shooter. He's also one of the better perimeter defenders on the Mavericks. He kind of plugs in nicely, at least in theory, on what you want to do if you're the Cavs. Maybe makes Isaac Okoro a little more expendable if you want to sell high on him to some team too, and then just kind of build around DFS, and maybe Ochai Agbaji is just like part of your wing rotation.
Well, it's more of, I think, of like you're getting a better defensive version of Lauri Markkanen, I think, is what you're getting.
Oh, yes.
It's not really an Okoro thing. I think it's more of a
Okoro thing, but like, I think like the perimeter defensive potential and at least just the defensive versatility Dorian Finney-Smith possesses is never going to be in the same level as Isaac Okoro, but like, it's a lot better than Lauri Markkanen, like you said.
I think it's
solid enough.
I think it's 3 4s. Yeah, it's 3s and 4s and not 2s, I think, is the delineation.
That's and then maybe you're hoping Ochai Agbaji can defend 1, 2s, and possibly 3s in certain scenarios too, and then you patch it out from there. But if that were the case, let's just say DFS is off the table. It's just like Tim Hardaway Jr. or maybe Reggie Bullock if the Mavericks are really trying to sell low here or buy low on Collin Sexton. I'd approach the Jazz and just say like, hey, Malik Beasley would probably be like my top target, because it's not apples to apples in what he is with Collin Sexton, but like there's some similarities there, and I think the youth and the overall just not like non-existent injury history just based on his NBA career is helpful. And like I said, Bogdanovich makes a lot of sense, but I think you do need to be, like you said, cognizant of both now and then 2 to 3 seasons from now as well. Like, Malik Beasley kind of fits in a little bit more cleanly down the line versus Bogdanovich, who could age like milk in a year or two.
Beasley has the financial contract side of it that is like, depending on what he wants and all that, that's where the concern for me would come with him. I'm looking up he's got 2 years left on his deal. The last year is a team option, but it's 15 next year, 16 the year after. That's the team option, then he's UFA. So it's 2 years of team control. Coming off 460, does he want to rate? There's questions there. My answer would be Utah, but only in this specific world. Is there a world where you can get your short-term reinforcement, and they've already made the Mitchell to the next trade and get all these this truckload of picks. Could you get something back in that and play that route? I would be curious. That's honestly, as crazy as it sounds, that's the card to me that like almost makes. If you're gonna do this, and you're gonna say, okay, the Sexton thing, we're gonna move on, whatever, and you decide to go that route. The picks part of it, considering what is out there, almost is more appealing to me than trying to just like go all in with someone for next season. But
so it's similar to the argument people make about the Thunder, where they have more picks than God and they can't use them all. So maybe the Cavs just try to sweeten their pot by doing that. Yeah, that makes sense too.
Yeah, they just like, hey, like we'll take a back salary you don't want as you're rebuilding, and give a veteran a winning situation. You give us some picks for this young player that you can sign to like a 4-year contract and all that stuff. And as you restart, like that's where I like. And we don't know this. This hasn't like really been out there in any way, either from what has been reported elsewhere. Like I think when we've talked to people and hypothetically talked about it, I still wonder if there's a little bit of waiting for other business to be done on both sides for this to kind of like. I don't think Sexton's situation is so tied to all of this that it's like it is gummed up because of all this. But I think like it feels like a lot of the other business in the league, bigger picture wise, is like waiting for these things to happen. And I think a lot of people kind of maybe just are looking at it and say, I don't want to put it on my chips now, lest I can get involved in this other thing that may or may not happen with Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell, who are like star players seemingly maybe getting traded. That's just like a guess. But like if I'm thinking about like how you could approach this if you're the Cavs, let's say, that would make some sense to me, just in kind of maximizing your window to do something. All right. After the break, we are going to get into where we think this is actually going to end, have a little banter about that. All right, last segment on Locked On Cavs. I'm Chris Manning. That's Evan Demerol. Evan, I would say if you asked me today, Collin Sexton is on the Cleveland Cavaliers opening night of the 2022-23 season. Do I have any guess or like feel good about a guess on like what the contract looks like? If it's the qualifying, if it's a 3-year deal, if it's a 4-year deal, whatever. I don't have a good guess on that. I think he's back in some way, shape, or form. Where are you at right now?
I think he is back in some way, shape, or form. I feel a little more comfortable saying it's likely going to be on the qualifying offer just at this juncture. Like you said, we're almost in September. At the top of the show, you said we're almost in September, and like nothing has really come to fruition. Like media day for the Cavs is coming pretty soon, and then also training camp opens for them pretty soon. This is likely going to drag out into that. It may hold hostage just over like the media circus that is the Cavs at the beginning of the season, just because it's young and exciting. But I think he's back. I feel comfortable saying on the qualifying offer, and then that's where it will get a little tricky. But again, the Cavs kind of have the luxury of time, and maybe they use this brief window they have until like the extension, the absolute last extension deadline for them. And I believe I don't know the date off the top of my head, but maybe this is an opportunity for both Sexton and the Cavs to audition with one another to make sure like, yeah, this is the right fit for us. And if it's not, come trade deadline time, maybe you find a way to get Sexton to the team he wants, because if he does pick up his qualifying offer, he has a no trade clause more or less in his contract where he can then dictate to the Cavs, hey, I don't think it's working. I want to go play for, let's just say like the Miami Heat or the Brooklyn Nets or the Los Angeles Lakers or something like that. And either the Cavs can say, okay, we'll work with you, or they'll say, no, we're not going to trade you to those guys. And then they'll let Collin go be a UFA next offseason, and then they can negotiate with him then. But I think he comes back on the QO.
That is just the scenario where I think I can't imagine he's on the team a year from now if that's where it is.
Oh, not a year from now. I think he would get moved by the deadline. I just want to know, well, one, how does the league feel about him by that point? And two, how bad has it gotten between both parties where he just wants to leave and isn't willing to like renegotiate with the Cavs in good faith as soon as free agency opens up the following offseason?
The qualifying is just like the scenario that
it's the doomsday scenario if you're Cleveland. You're like, oh shoot, we really have to.
Yeah, we played this
tread
out
lightly here.
Yeah, well, it's like if you go that route, if it ends up that route, you've played it in such a specific way that like it just makes it tricky. And like even from the Sexton point of view, which is like really the side of a lot of this that I don't feel like we know. I feel like a lot of the information that is out there has been more on.
It's been speculative and mostly on the team side of things. If it's on Sexton's feelings on the situation, it's speculative. Like he's been relatively quiet on the situation. He's just more or less said, I'm gonna let Rich handle this every time he's really asked about it.
Well, and even just that, like there hasn't been like leaks from that side of things that really I think lend any real information onto like what he's thinking. And like his public appearances have been like just the pro-am stuff he's done and like very little else. Like it's been a quiet stretch for Collin Sexton. So we just like don't really know. And like there is just risk for him in the qualifying too is like part of this. Like every time I read like a newser about the Sexton stuff or like see like a blog about it or whatever, or tweets about it even, the idea that like the qualifying is like a massive, like it's almost like the tone of it is almost sometimes like a massive W for Collin. And I don't really necessarily believe that that's a massive W for Collin because like number one, you're not like the money you'd be making less money, guaranteed money next year, which isn't the whole deal, but like that you're losing some money in the short term. Secondly, there is no guarantee next year is like perfect for you, and that there's like a golden market waiting for you next summer. Yes, there is more money next summer. Yes, there's going to be more teams with money to spend, and history shows that teams will spend the money when they have it, and that could lead to something for you. And certainly, I think agencies and teams. Let's say play their cards, like look into the future a little bit more and plan that stuff out a little bit more than we necessarily always know, right? Like that is certainly part of it. The qualifying and just like him being in a situation where like the team has shifted without him and they are things are just a little different now for him structurally within the Cavs right now than they were like before he goes down for injury, makes it just a really but yeah, and just before that, it makes it a really tricky thing for me to say like, okay, this is like almost like a no-brainer thing. I understand, and I think I would, if I were him, I would say take the qualifying over 3 years 40. Like 3 years 40 is like just feels very low to me. I think he's at least like a $15-16 million a year guy. But like,
I'd go a little higher maybe, just because.
I said minimum. I said minimum. I said minimum. Yeah,
that's like ballpark. Okay,
I'm saying minimum. Like I'm saying 15, 16 in that range. That's like the minimum that I'm willing to entertain. But the qualifying just has risk too, and that's what like leads me to wonder like, does he end up taking some kind of deal that is like middle between that? And look, we're also just so far away from the reported like 4 years 72 from last summer. Like we are drastically away from that, which in itself is kind of crazy.
Yeah, that is interesting to think about. I don't really know. Again, there's just so much uncertainty. Like, yes, you could really like bang your fist on the table, and I'm sure like there's the Sextonistas out there who like lists the sixth thing he's better at Karis LeVert at. Like, yeah, you can share all that stuff. I don't care. We just don't know what he would get from an NBA team right now because the market doesn't really exist, and the Cavs don't want to give him the money he's looking for, and they're trying to negotiate with him all while trying to stay below the luxury tax threshold, which I think that's smart team building. You don't know what you have as a team. You're not a contender. You don't need to be paying the luxury tax quite yet. I want to ask you this as we wrap up. Do you think this ends up being, I wouldn't say how Marvin Bagley's time ended in Sacramento, where he was more or less phased out of the rotation. I don't think that'll be the case if Collin comes back. But do you think the Cavs, if he takes the qualifying offer, if they know they're not going to be able to bring him back, that's when they just like try their damnedest to move him and just try and find him a new home?
I think it's possible. I just think the difference is that Collin Sexton has been good and Marvin Bagley was never good.
Well, he was good at Duke.
But he was not good in the NBA, and that's where the money is.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. But that's... I don't know. I think ideally for Collin, if you want to really rehabilitate your image and have the runway to play through some of your mistakes and also just have more of a ball dominant role where maybe you're not being compartmentalized and asked to do less while more is expected out of you in those maybe limited opportunities, you'd be looking to go to a team like Detroit or maybe Utah after the Donovan Mitchell leaves town. Like there's opportunities for Collin out there. It's a lot like Isaac Okoro's just wonky development last season. It's unfortunate because if the Cavs weren't a winning team right away, I think if you're the Cleveland, like, okay, we have the opportunity now to really look at Collin because we can give him some serious burnout out there on the floor and figure out where he's at physically and just kind of where he fits in this just new hierarchy with all these new young faces in town.
Yes. All right, we'll leave it there. On tomorrow's show, we're going to do a very August Locked On Cavs thing, which is we're going to talk about LeBron James signing the extension with the Lakers.
Jake, put the vine in.
LeBron James.
Don't put the vine in. I mean, you could. Oh, LeBron James? Yeah. I mean, you could. Jake, that's a lot of... Don't make Jake do extra work. But thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. This episode was produced by the aforementioned Jake Stevens. We're just going to talk about LeBron because we kind of need to. For your second listen today, check out the latest news and rumors in the NBA. Just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Locked On is your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Check that out. I'm Chris. That's Evan. Thanks again to Jake for producing this one. Peace out.